This book, it did not get better. It got worse. I was not expecting bodies being nailed to the wall. Y'all, this is not the book I signed up for. If I want torture and beatings, I read a horror novel. And honestly, I don't ever want torture and beatings. Things got so very dark. Hey, book lovers. Welcome to While I Read. I'm Katie Dodrell. Today, I wanted to do a special episode with a book review of A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This book. Sorry, I have to get myself mentally prepared. So I first read this book back in February. I included it in my February reading wrap-up. And you could probably tell from when I talked about it there that I was pretty shaken up by that book. I don't know if you could even call what I said on that episode a review of the book, because I just didn't know what to say about it. I didn't know what to think. I told you on that review that I wanted to give myself some time to process the book and then talk more about it. So that's what I'm doing today. Since my reading wrap up, I've listened to a lot of reviews and vlogs about the ACOTAR series, and I'm very proud that I know that acronym now. I'm one of the cool people. One thing I've found is that people tend to have very strong feelings about this book. They either love it or they hate it. It was recommended to me by the library assistant at Andrew College where I work, and she loved it. She sold me on it. But then, as I was reading it, I talked to a couple of other coworkers who had read it. One of them didn't finish it because she didn't like it. The other had finished it but hated it. What do you think of ACOTAR? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Or are you one of the rare people who is somewhere in the middle? Please drop your thoughts about it in the comments. I'm going to talk more about my own feelings about ACOTAR now that I've had more time to process it. I realize that I'm late to the party. A Court of Thorns and Roses has been out since 2015. I honestly don't know why this book has not been on my radar. A lot of aspects of it were fairly unexpected to me. Honestly, I feel like I kind of need a therapy session after finishing this book. This review may serve as my therapy session, so sorry about that. But I do feel like I now have a better understanding of my own feelings about the book. So, how do I feel about the book? Do I love it? Do I hate it? Meh. Sorry about the anticlimax, but I really am kind of in the middle on this book, but leaning more towards the dislike side. I did like some aspects of it, but I absolutely hated other aspects of it. So in this review, I'm going to talk about what I liked and disliked. There will be some spoilers, but I'll put spoiler on the bottom of the screen, and I'll also put the timestamp for the spoilers in the description box. Basically, I liked the first half of the book, especially the world building. The middle is okay, but not great. And I absolutely hated the end. So let's talk about what I liked, the world building. World building is a characteristic of all fiction where the author creates the world that the characters are living in. But it's especially noticeable in science fiction and fantasy literature because the author literally has to create a whole new world. In all fantasy series, world building is one of my favorite aspects. I think about my favorite fantasy series, the Harry Potter series. The creation of the world of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry is my favorite aspect of those books. I just love immersing myself in that world that J.K. Rowling has created. And I'm using Harry Potter as an example because it's my favorite fantasy series. But really, in all fantasy series, the world building is what I love most of all. In ACOTAR, I didn't love the world like I did in Harry Potter, but I did enjoy Moss's creation. It starts off in the human world, and for the main character, Feyre, that world is pretty awful. She lives in poverty with her father and her two sisters. They're all pretty helpless. One of her sisters is just mean, and they basically take for granted that Feyre is going to look after them. Like a lot of characters in fantasy literature, Feyre's life in the everyday human world is pretty awful. But as you're reading it, you know that she'll soon be leaving the everyday human world and things will get better, or at least different. And that's what happened. Feyre goes to live in the magical world of Prythian against her will. The next part of the book is about Feyre living in Prythian on the estate of Tamlin, her captor. Tamlin is one of those characters that people seem to have really strong feelings for. A lot of people really don't like him. They think that he's abusive towards Feyre. I really didn't see that, at least in this book. Of course, this is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and Beauty and the Beast does have some Stockholm syndrome in it. That's just part of Beauty and the Beast. You can't really get away from it. The Beast, Tamlin, is forcing the beauty, Feyre, to live with him against her will, and that's just how the story is. But I felt like Moss did a good job of explaining why Feyre has to live with Tamlin. It's very complicated. I won't go into it here, but it has to do with a spell, a curse, just as in every retelling of Beauty and the Beast. And Tamlin does his best to try to make Feyre comfortable with him. So, for about the first half of the book, Feyre is living on Tamlin's estate, learning about Tamlin, learning about Prythian, learning about the curse that the land is under. There are descriptions of her wandering around Tamlin's luxurious home, of her riding her horse on his beautiful estate, wandering around in the creepy forest and meeting various fairy creatures, some good, some bad. I loved learning about the land of Prythian, the curse the land is under. I also really enjoyed that in this part of the book, Feyre gets to live her best life. For one thing, when she was living in the everyday world with her family, she was starving. And now that she's living with Tamlin, she finally gets to eat all the good food that she wants to eat. Feyre also loves to paint. And when she was living at home with her family in poverty, she didn't have the time or the luxury to paint. But now that she's living with Tamlin, she does. I love the descriptions of Feyre feeling inspired, spending hours and days painting, and finally finding the courage to show Tamlin her work. And I love his encouragement of her. Basically, she's living the life that we would all want to live in this section of the book. She's living in a beautiful house. She's getting to do what she loves. She has a handsome guy slash fairy to explore the world with her. What's not to like about this life? We all know Feyre and Tamlin are going to fall in love, right? That's not a spoiler. This is Beauty and the Beast. She's Beauty, he's the Beast. They're going to fall in love. So it's fun watching their relationship. There's also a funny sidekick named Lucian who has a pretty cool backstory. So I really enjoyed this first half of the book. I was about halfway through when I did my February reading wrap up and said, I love the book and recommended the book for everybody to read. Lesson learned: do not review a book if you have not actually finished the book. I actually already knew this. I'm an English teacher. I don't know why I did that. I just really thought that I would continue to love the book. So, this is where we get into the spoiler section of this book review. Around the midpoint, maybe the 60% mark, Tamlin sends Feyre away from Prithian and back to her family because she's being threatened by the mysterious curse. So Feyre goes back to live with her family, and this is the part where I wasn't hating the book, but I wasn't that interested in it either. Her family is rich now because Tamlin has made sure that they're taken care of. Her sisters have both changed for the better, and I couldn't decide whether I liked the change or whether I thought that it wasn't very believable. I still haven't really decided what I think about it. So, this part of the book was not terrible, but it wasn't very interesting either. It was just kind of boring when Feyre wasn't in Prithian anymore. Then Feyre goes back to Prithian, and all heck breaks loose. Feyre goes under the mountain to save Tamlin from the book's villain, Amarantha. Amarantha has basically made all the fairies live with her under the mountain. It's about at the 70% mark that Feyre goes under the mountain. And this is where I just started hating the story. I really wanted to quit, but I had invested so much time in the book and I had liked the book up to this point. I just kept hoping that it would get better. It did not get better. It got worse. As soon as Feyre gets under the mountain, she sees the body of a young woman that Amarantha had tortured and killed because she thought that woman was Feyre. The body is nailed on the wall. Then Feyre gets beaten bloody and thrown into a prison cell. Y'all, this is a young adult fantasy novel. When I read the phrase under the mountain, I thought about The Hobbit and the king under the mountain. I was so naive. I was expecting it to be a little creepy in a fun YA kind of way. I was not expecting bodies being nailed to the wall. Y'all, this is not the book I signed up for. If I want torture and beatings, I read a horror novel. And honestly, I don't ever want torture and beatings. I certainly don't want them in a young adult fantasy novel. Feyre is kept in prison while she has to complete tasks for Amarantha so that she can save Tamlin's life. While she's in prison, she gets sick and she's sort of rescued by another male fairy named Rysand. From what I've read, a lot of people like Rysand better than Tamlin, and I just do not get it. Rysand sort of has a thing for Feyre. One of the things he does is force her to dress up in sexy see-through clothing and come to Amarantha's parties with him. And at the parties, he makes Amarantha drink fairy wine so that she'll get drunk and dance provocatively while the other fairies there laugh at her. Then she goes back to her cell and vomits in the corner for the rest of the night. I went ahead and read spoilers for the rest of the series because, as I've told you, I don't mind knowing the ends of books. And I found out that Feyre actually ends up with Rysand at the end of the series. What the heck? He sounds like an abuser to me. At the end of the book, Feyre has to complete the final task to win Tamlin back and basically save all fairy kind from Amarantha. And the task is that she has to stab two innocent fairies to death. They are tied up. One of them is crying and begging for his life, and Feyre has to kill them. I was certain that something was going to happen that would keep Feyre from having to do it, or that the fairies would end up not really being dead. But no, she stabs them. Their bloody deaths at her hand are described in great detail. Okay, spoilers over for now. So I just have to say one more time, this is a young adult fantasy novel. I know I keep harping on that. But when I go into a young adult fantasy novel, I don't go into it expecting this. It would have been nice before I read this book to have a little warning that things got so very dark. For those of you who have read the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, what do you like about the series? Were you expecting it to get so dark, or were you surprised like I was? I'm certainly not going to judge anybody's reading taste. I know that these books are very popular. And as I said, I actually really liked the beginning of the books. From reading about the other books in the series, I can tell that there are aspects of them that I would like. So maybe the torture aspect of the books rubbed off on me a little bit, but I'm considering reading the rest of the books in the series, or at least one or two more of them, and talking about them here. It may be a hate review like this one, or maybe I'll end up enjoying some of the other books in the series. I've got a poll posted on my channel. Should I read the rest of the books in the series, or should I move on to other books? Whatever you decide in the poll will be my fate. Honestly, I can't decide what I hope that you vote for. On the one hand, I didn't really enjoy the book that much, but it was kind of fun to do this hate review of it here. And maybe I'll end up liking the rest of the books better. Now, go vote in my poll while I read.